Do you agree, by the way, with my prognosis
Well,
that you are recreating yourself again and again and again?
think I'm, yes. And I think what this last few years has been is really owning myself rather than, and it's still a process. It's still a question in my head all the time. It's like, what is really true for me? Because my life has been so much about what's required for others. And so I think, what you're referring to is that I grew up in a cult, right? Yeah. So so it took me a long time to say that that's what it was. So part of my story, and it is challenging to talk about because it's involved and it was very long years. I started talking about it in the last 3 years, like openly, really referring to it. Yeah, because it used to just be like, oh, that's, it's just my history. Because it has been the last 2 months where I'm like getting more and more solid in my work, in myself, being able to talk about all this. So when my mother was getting divorced, she joined a church. And I didn't, before that, we had like no religion in my house. And for those who don't know, I converted to Judaism later in life, but grew up, I'll tell you this in a second. So my mom went to a church and it was her spiritual foundation. My uncle was the organist there. And as she was going through a divorce, it gave her something, with people and community and a spiritual support. Well, the church was very fundamentally Christian and very much the ideology of the more you want to be closer to Jesus, the more you have to understand Judaism. And so when we joined, less and less became about Christianity and Jesus, and more became about Judaism. So by the time I was 8 or 9, everything Christian had been like out of, and again, I didn't really have a Christian background, so it wasn't like I knew the difference. I kind of went to a church, heard Jesus for a year, and then suddenly he didn't matter anymore. So it was like all the Hebrew names and Yeshua, and that Jesus was the Messiah, but we had to understand Judaism. Lots of people started going to Israel. They were learning Hebrew. We started lighting Shabbat candles. I actually, from the time I was 10, our house became a kosher house. And then we started keeping Shabbat. And so probably by the time I was 13, we were Shomer Shabbat. Like I would not drive or go participate in high school sports or anything on Shabbat. And my father married a Jewish woman and my stepfather was Jewish. So culturally, all my holidays were with those families. So I was doing Pesach and Purim. And so I grew up completely immersed in everything Jewish. But the group was a cult. So the leader was a psychopath, and people thought he was directly descended from Jesus. There was mythologies taught about the end times coming. There was a structure. There were over 1,000 people involved. And there was a structure that had like inner circles and inner circles and inner circles of who knew certain secrets. And my family ended up being in the inner circle. And so every weekend we went to services. Everything was about the community. We gave them a ton of money. And it was about the end times coming and living on a commune eventually as a community, and that we were going to channel in, I don't even remember all the mythologies, but any cult you read about, it pretty much, you can just overlay this. It was called Sheresh Yeshai, so from the root of Jesse. And from that, I was in that when I went to Israel. So I was in that group secretly, could not tell anybody. So 3 months I was in Israel, people just assumed I was Jewish. And I just was in my heart and soul. My stepfather and I were very close. He did not agree with a lot of the things in the group. So I really learned culturally about Jewish history from him. And I walked out when I was 18. So he had died. So I'd come back from Israel. My stepfather died. And there were some things being coming to the surface about activities that were going on. So the leadership, they were molesting young boys, and there were beatings going on, and there was just some really gross behavior happening, not at all aligned with Jewish teachings. And at one point I told my mom, I was like, we have to leave. She said, are you staying? I said, no, I'm not staying. And the kind of the way that happened was the leader of the organization, there was a lot of proselytizing. So you're supposed to go out and seek people and bring them to the group, because that was part of what our mission was. And he stood up in front of the group one day. He's like, you didn't do what God said, so this is all done. You're all sinners. God's turned his back on you. Never told this to many people. And what I remember, my brother called my mother to tell her that story. And I remember feeling absolute relief. I was like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to be involved in this anymore. I don't know where that came from, but so anyway, we took a vacation, my mom and I and my sister-in-law, we took a 2-week vacation in Florida with all the kids. And I came home a week before her. And I just started interviewing people and researching. And I was like, I need to leave. I need to get out of here. And I vividly remember this moment. There was a gathering of youth. It was a huge youth group I was involved with. And I remember we went around the circle and everybody was deciding, are you staying or are you going? There was thoughts about this was the end times. This was Satan. This was not real. We were being attacked. You have to decide you're staying or going. And I've listened to everybody say that they were staying. All my friends I grew up with. And it got to me, and I was like, I'm not staying in this. And it's such a pivotal moment in my life. I got up and I vividly remember walking through that doorway, like putting my hand on that doorway and knowing I was walking away from every friend I grew up with. And that was it. And one friend of mine came out and said, we'll always stay in touch. We'll stay in touch. I said, you can't talk to me. Like, it was that intense. Like, if someone left, you couldn't talk to them anymore.